All right, everybody. How are you doing? I'm glad to be with you. My name is Jeff. I'm one of the pastors here at Harbor Point, and I know for a lot of you guys, it's a big sports weekend. Already some big news. The United States mixed curling team advanced past its first match. So obviously, that's the big thing we're all thinking about this particular weekend in sports. Just kidding. Well, obviously, curling's its own weird thing. I'm sure they thought regular curling wasn't getting crazy enough, so we got to make it mixed curling, ice shuffleboard, whatever. But however we want to talk about it, obviously this weekend for most of us to kind of give you a frame is of course Super Bowl. And if you're wondering who to choose for I don't have really necessarily a team I'm for in either case, whether it's the Seattle Seahawks, or the New England Patriots. I really don't like the New England Patriots, mainly because a dotted line Boston, which is the Celtics. I'm a Lakers fan. I don't like, you get that idea. But if you're looking for a person to root for, Sam Darnold's a hometown guy from this area. So if you're looking for like a hometown hero guy, he's the quarterback of the Seahawks, in case you're looking for a team to kind of cheer for. All right. Now, these two teams, oh, sorry, I should say this. If you're new, I want to let you know, if you're not familiar with Harbor Point, maybe someone invited you, you're checking some stuff out. Want to just remind you, this isn't a place where everybody has it all figured out. So if you're looking for a place where everybody has all the answers or knows what to do in every circumstance, that's just not us. And we're convinced, I should say, we're made for life with Jesus, and that we need each other to do that together, because nothing happens in straight lines, and we trip and fall all over ourselves all over the time. And so however you kind of found your way here, just try to exhale a little bit. We don't have it all figured out. Hopefully you want to jump in on the journey with us as we look at Jesus. So that's what we're about. Now let's get right to it. Speaking of the Super Bowl, there are, there's obviously these two teams are at the end of their season, long season, preseason. And the reward for all their hard work all the way through all the games that they played, the reward for all their success is just more work. I mean, if you wanted to go to Cabo in January and you're a football player, kind of take time off, then you should lose. But you win, and these guys end up going all the way to the Super Bowl. Now, it's nothing but workouts and drills and being sore and going through simulated game things and film and all that other stuff. And then rehabbing and practice. Gosh, there's so much practice. Now, both of these teams get to the Super Bowl. By the time they're here, none of them would say that their goal was perfect practice. I mean, granted, in a practice, they want to do it well and they want to execute well in practice. But no one plays the game just to practice. I mean, that's sort of the tragic moment of the movie The Sandlot, where they're all like, all we do is we have nothing but practice. And they do that, but the big payoff is when they get to play a game. Because there's no trophy or there's no parade. There's no like way to go you for winning the scrimmage or having the most yards at practice. The whole point of practice is to prepare for something else. Nobody says at the outset of the season, our goal is to be at the end of the season, no matter what happens with our record, we just want to be the team that practiced perfectly. The intent of practice is to be prepared for the game. And at the end of the season, at the end of the Super Bowl, at the end of that game, it's the team with the most points, not the people that have been judged to have done the most drills with the most perfection. That's not really what it's about. So at the end of the day, we get to this point at the end of the Super Bowl. If it really matters is what matters most is points, we have to ask the question then, and not practice, then what role does practice have at all? Because it must matter to a certain extent, right? Now, a couple weeks ago, this is the last week of the series, we started a series called What Practice Makes. This is the 5th week of it. And we said in it, everybody has a need to be something. Everybody has a longing to just sort of be acknowledged for who they are. Kind of, in other words, to be seen and to be known, to be identified, warts and all, who they are. But everybody also has a need to become something. That is to say that there's a part of us that needs to change or be different, that isn't what it ought to be right now. Some parts of us that we ought to address that should become something different. And so the Bible actually has a way of describing that. And we've been kind of using this to kind of set up to ground our series as we've been going. But in Psalm 139, it says this: "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. You did a good job making me. This is just me being," right? Then it goes on a couple verses later in the same exact little passage. It just says, "Search me, God, and know my heart, and test me, and see if there's any offensive way in me, like any of my anxious thoughts, and lead me in the way everlasting," as if to say there's probably still some parts of me that need to become something else. Now, as we've been talking, we've been saying is that the becoming process, at least in terms of the way, sort of in Christian circles, church circles, the way people talk about it, it's not exclusively a Christian word, but the way it kind of gets talked about, this becoming process is the process of what's called formation. And what we've been talking about throughout this series is that the more that I do a thing, the more I do a thing, meaning the more I kind of repeat a particular way of doing a thing, the more I'm likely to repeat it. And that process of repetition is actually shaping me, whether I intend to be shaped or not. that process of kind of overdoing a thing over and over again is going to actually shape me into being a particular thing. Now, when it comes to our actual intent to be formed, when we're looking at our lives, a lot of the time what we're looking for is a hack. We're looking for a shortcut. Like we look at our lives now and we go, if I could only be like that, whatever that is, that would be great. And I just want to get there. I don't want to go through whatever the process is to get there. I just want to be there. And what we find out is really that's pretty tough. And actually probably the best way to sort of think about it, instead of a hack, instead of just sort of instantly becoming something, is actually there's a long process. And that process actually is about practice. So that said, one of the things we know about practice, and to complete the sentence that has been sort of haunting us if you've been with us throughout this past series, is that everybody knows practice makes perfect, right? We all kind of know that, right? But it's a little bit disquieting, the idea of perfect, because we have a strange relationship with perfect. I mean, we have an okay relationship with practice, but with perfect, we have an interesting relationship with that idea. I mean, there's some areas of our lives where we're like, and everybody has one of these areas where it's like, I have to be perfect in this area or it's a catastrophe. Like if I don't do something, whatever it might be, great. And there are other areas of our lives where we demand perfection from other people, but not from us. That's called driving, where we make a mistake and we're like, lighten up, and someone else cuts us off, or they don't signal or whatever, and we're like, how in the world do they even have a license? I can't believe this person's allowed to go outside the house. I mean, we have a sort of an interesting relationship with perfection, because at times we're kind of okay with it, other times we're not so okay with it. So what is it about? Does practice, if we do things enough, are we expecting ourselves to become perfect? Is that the goal? CNBC on their webpage had an article about perfection. It said this: perfectionists have higher levels of motivation than non-perfectionists, research shows, which can make you feel like your relentless pursuit of perfection alone is keeping you on track. Yeehaw. But the benefits stop there. Perfectionism also leads to low self-worth, high stress, and depression and anxiety disorders. Your work suffers too. By completing tasks less efficiently, perfectionists actually produce lower quality work than they're capable of. And there's one more thing. Longer term, perfectionism usually leads people down one of two paths, neither of which are good for you. The first one is you'll either overwork yourself until you're totally burnt out, or endlessly procrastinate because the stakes feel too high. Like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Like, well, I like the idea of kind of wanting to do things with excellence. That's all kind of that's something I believe in. I'm sure a lot of you kind of with certain areas of your life are like, I want to do this well, of course. But I don't know if you've ever had this experience. You ever get plagued by like a crystal clear 2020 replay of what happened like just like a minute ago or an hour ago or 2 weeks ago or days ago or years ago, that you really can't do anything to adjust, but it's like, I did that thing, and it was like, I wish I could change it now, but you can't, and you're cursed by it. And it's like, what could I do? I have this, by the way, it's literally, I refer to it as the Monday curse, because Monday's my day off. Usually on Monday, all I'm doing is replaying these moments right here. Everything I said that now people are like, why do you say that? That was lame, or that wasn't funny, or why do you think that was funny? Or that's ridiculous, or I can't believe people even believe that. I mean, whatever it is, I'm replaying things, thinking of ways I could have reset it, but it's already gone. That's all a symptom of this kind of perfectionism, wanting to be something that is so beyond me, and even to go back in time somehow and somehow make those adjustments. So we have an interesting relationship with perfectionism. Maybe it does drive us to do some things well, but maybe it does also burn us out or lead us to a place where we're so overwhelmed at the prospect of not being good enough that we just stop. In fact, maybe it's actually about something other than just our ability to deliver results. Check this out. This is a researcher from Boston University. She says, perfectionism is often thought of as the desire to be perfect, striving to have no mistakes, no flaws. Notice what she says. But in my clinical work, I've really found the opposite to be true. No one ever comes in and identifies as a perfectionist, which I think is interesting. She says, instead, people come in and say, I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm falling behind, and I feel like I'm letting everybody down. Oh, so that's the way perfectionists talk. She continues. So the way it manifests or shows up in my experience is that it does come across as never feeling good enough. So perfectionism isn't really about trying to get great results. It's really about worrying if you're good enough. It's about worrying if, really, in some ways, you could say that perfectionism has its roots in a fear of not belonging at all. If I screw up, if I mess up, if I fall behind, if I'm not good enough? Where's my place? Who are my people? Who would want me around? Yeah. I mean, like I said, we do have an interesting relationship with perfectionism. We know the adage, practice makes perfect. And then we come across something like this, which is probably one of the most shocking things in the entire Bible, which is this. Or maybe it's not. I should actually say it this way. Maybe for you, as I show you this next thing, you might be like, I knew it. I knew this was in there. And everybody else hasn't been telling me the whole truth. And some of you are like, I had no idea this was in there. And here you go. Get ready for this verse right here, Matthew 5:48, which says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And some of you just went, oh my gosh, I get it. This is why I never wanted to come back to church. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes panic, apparently, because all my fears have been realized. This is why we stopped going. This is why I was so frustrated with the church. A lot of us maybe just started inventorying all the stupid stuff we did over the last 48 hours. Like, why did I do all those things? And what we heard in that verse was, be as perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But that's not at all what it says. We read it as, be as perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, or as your heavenly Father is perfect. But that's like as if saying, to the degree he's perfect, you're also supposed to be perfect. But that's not what it says. We just hear it that way because we panic when we hear the Bible say, be perfect. Let me show you it again. And this is really important. It says this, be perfect, not be as perfect, therefore. Be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now that means something radically different. And it seems like it might be saying the same thing, but I want to show you that what these words just might be some of the most beautiful and most encouraging in the entire Bible. You and I just read our lens into it that says, oh my gosh, this is about trying to be as perfect as the perfection, as God. I mean, that's what we read that as, but it's saying something different that might actually be really encouraging. So let's get to that. Let me give you some context for this verse. For about 3 chapters, Jesus has this conversation with a group of people on a hillside. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. We reference it a lot during the series, but he's talking to a bunch of people on this hillside, and he's basically describing a radical new community. And this new community is going to look different than anybody's ever seen before. And in it, as he talks about this community, everybody in it is not just simply about, it's not just like individuals. Like the members are described by something. They're described as being called brothers and sisters. So it's not just like you members or citizens, although that Jesus does use, or the Bible does use the term citizens elsewhere to describe people. But here it says, in this big description, 3 chapters worth of describing this new community, the members of that community are described as brothers and sisters. And one of the issues that they have to address, Jesus has to address, is what do I do with people who hate me? And what do I do with the people I hate? Which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Because it would have been expected at that particular time. There were real enemies, real people that ought to be hated. What are you supposed to do with those kinds of people? It would have been anticipated that everybody would have had some enemies. And Jesus is kind of going to have to address this new community as one of the most important issues is who do we regard as sort of enemies and who are non-enemies? And so here's Jesus's answer. So, well, by the way, I should say this. Most of what you'll see is, and this isn't a surprise, most all of us, without thinking about it, I would just say, I'll go ahead and say all of us, our instinct when we encounter enemies is to simply figure out a way to eliminate them. And if we can't eliminate them, minimize them and or at least get permission to keep despising them. Does that make sense? This is what we typically do when we encounter someone who we envision to be a particular kind of enemy. And here's Jesus' response to that. Matthew 5:43 says this, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is a radical departure from the way people have always thought about enemies. Then he continues, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Now, what he's drawing the line here is to identify what a sort of father, like the relationship between these brothers and sisters where God is their father, the children of God the Father. The way you would identify those people is the way that they treat their enemies. Keep on reading. He causes, meaning God, causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And then he says, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? As if to say, big deal if you love people who you're already fans of. Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Which is interesting. Tax collector is like a special category of like really like heinous kind of sinner, which is funny because in about 4 chapters, Jesus is going to recruit a guy named Matthew who's actually writing this gospel account, who's a tax collector. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But he says, even the tax collectors love who they love. That's not even a big deal. Even the worst kind of sinner does this kind of thing. Then he continues. And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even pagans do that? Like, big deal if you do that. Now, most of us, when we heard, about the whole notion of hating people and, all that kind of, like, I don't hate anybody. I don't have any hate. But I did think it's interesting to look at this one particular point. Someone pointed out this week about greeting. Because, all of us have those people who are like, I hope they don't see me. Don't make eye contact with them. Please don't see me. Oh my gosh, they saw me. And hi, how are you? Oh my gosh, it's so good. We all have those moments where, like, I don't even want to greet those people. And Jesus includes that idea of not wanting to greet people in with the same umbrella as hating people, because what it's essentially saying is, I wish you just weren't around. I just wish you didn't exist. That's really how we kind of live our lives. And he says, so Jesus is saying, what am I supposed to do? This regards to this. If the people are asking him, what am I supposed to do with the people that I hate? I'm supposed to love them, which that seems pretty tough, to love a person that you hate. It almost seems like it would minimize the hating. And then he says, Matthew 5:48, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So let's talk about the word perfect for a second. The word perfect is this particular word in the Greek. It's teleos, which it really means less than you and I might think about it as, like, at least what this word's used. It's used elsewhere in other parts of the Bible the same exact word is used to describe the word complete or mature. So it's not necessarily moral perfection. That's what we could kind of think about it, but it's really about completeness or maturity, which that's a different kind of description. In other words, if we talk about maturity, what we're actually talking about, to use our language, is becoming. It's what the end result of our becoming ought to become mature. The parallel verse. So there's 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They account for Jesus' life and his ministry and his death and resurrection. And then there's other sort of parts of the Bible that talk about other things. But these gospel accounts, some of them they both are writing about the same events that happened. They repeat a couple different times, and there's some differences between them and stuff. In the parallel story, in Luke's account of this exact same passage, the way he summarizes all of this love for enemies and all that stuff, he uses a different word. He says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Which seems to indicate that what seems to be indicated as Jesus is talking here isn't that he's after everybody being perfect, like you and I might think about perfect, but he's after a maturity, and the maturity he's seeking is a kind of love for enemies. Like, a mature person would love their enemies in the same manner, not maybe to the same degree that God was because he's perfect, but in the same manner as God does. In other words, you can identify God's children when they imitate his compassion for the people that are farthest from them, their enemies. Now you have to ask the question then, what kind of barrier would there be between that kind of maturity and completeness that's being talked about here? The simplest and the clearest sort of barrier to that kind of living in this new community of people would be to disregard or to mistreat people, to not see them as brothers and sisters, or as incapable of becoming brothers and sisters. And one way we do that. So if there's a community intended to be brothers and sisters, and yet there's also a way to undo that kind of community. There is a way to do that. And one way we all do it, every single person does it, whether or not you're a Jesus person or not, in any kind of thing, the way you undo a sort of a belonging network of a community like this, the one way you do it is to find a way to keep score in a game that has no scoreboard. It's to find a way to keep a score in a game that has no scoreboard. And the only way to do that in this particular, in fact, I'll stop there. Think about this. Think about all the ways we kind of keep score in what there is no official scoreboard in our lives. Whether it's how much money people make, where we live, the cars we drive, the activities we do, the vacations we took, how well we did in school, how well we're doing in school, what kind of degrees we've got. Think about even things like this where it gets really petty. Have you ever, I love the Lakers, I'm a Lakers fan. But I always feel like if I tell someone that, the next thing that's happening is I'm being quizzed on how serious of a fan I am, because I can't watch all the games. I don't know about the latest trade rumors. I don't know all this stuff. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm trying to qualify myself as a particular kind of fan. You could do with anything, surfing or mountain biking or whatever. How often do you go? Where do you go? Do you guys do this? Do you have this gear? Do you do all these things? And pretty soon, all of a sudden, we're measuring everything against each other. And there's a scoreboard where there never was one before. And pretty soon we feel like, as soon as there's a scoreboard, we all feel like we're losing. And we're all competing with each other. I mean, and the only way to do it in this particular context that Jesus is talking about, if there's no scoreboard for essentially how we're living, is to start measuring practices, because that's how people's practices are going. Because if we can measure those, then we can keep score and we can see who really belongs and who doesn't, and who's being kind of a brother and sister and who's actually not being that. Do they carry their Bible everywhere they go? Is it a really fat Bible? Does it have all the markers in it? Do they just look at it on their phone? Oh, wow. Do they carry around an old scroll and walk around with that and carry a bunch of scroll? I mean, how is it that you might measure all these things? In this case, Jesus is going to talk about some very specific practices. Because our fear, we start putting up a scoreboard and start keeping score, all of a sudden we start feeling the fear that if someone else has more points than me on the board, they might take my spot on the roster and I might not have a place anymore. And all of a sudden, those people that are around me who are also competing in this game, so to speak, all those people, I start looking at them with fear. They cause me fear and anxiety and suspicion and comparison. And if they cause me fear, then they're a threat. And if they're a threat to me, then I can at least give myself a little bit of permission to hate them. And if I can hate them, then they're my enemy. And all of a sudden, we've lost the whole thing. So what do? Jesus assumes that the faithful people will have some practices in their lives, that there will be some need, as Jesus will say in another story, to cultivate the soil of our own heart. Not because these practices are producing a thing, but they're actually getting our hearts ready for what God will do in them. So practices are really important. And at the end of the day, practice doesn't maybe make perfect, although we would kind of like the expression, but that's not what practice makes. At the end of the day, what practice does is it makes patterns. Practice makes patterns. And Jesus will say, if you make those patterns into a way of keeping score, you will miss out. So he gives us a little bit of direction. He says, look, right after. So Matthew 5:48, it's the last verse in Matthew chapter 5, jumps to Matthew 6. Here's what he says. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. In other words, there are things that you ought to do, but don't do it for the sake of other people. Don't do it for them. Don't use it to keep score. Then what Jesus will do right after this is he'll give an example of 3 different practices and how to approach them. What's interesting is he uses a sequence here to describe, he uses the same sort of pattern. In fact, just to give you, it's a rough overview, but to give you a sequence of how he sets this up, it looks like this. And I'll say what it is, when you do whenever you initiate this practice, don't be like whoever, you'll see what that looks like in a second. Instead, be like this. And instead of just put that in quotes, it could be a lot of different ways he's saying it, but you get the basic setup. He's going to say, here are some practices that you ought to include. In fact, the way he says it when he says when you is actually not if you kind of want to. He's like, the assumption is that the audience he's talking to is already doing these things. What he's doing is not introducing a new thing. What he's doing is introducing a new way to approach the common practice. And in every single one of these things that he's talking about, he's only going to talk about 3 here, but when he talks about them, he's essentially asking us, who's this for? When you're doing this, who's this for? Because the warning you'll see throughout these 3 things, the warning you'll see is this. If you're trying to score points by doing these practices with me, Jesus, or with other people, if you're trying to score points, you're missing the point. He's going to give us 3 practices, and he's saying, look, who's this for? Is it for everybody else? Or is this really for your own transformation? Is this for you, between you and God? And if you're trying to make it about scoring points or tallying points against other people, you are missing the entire point altogether. So here's what he says. I'm going to go through these, and we'll give you some things to think about. Here's what he says. Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. So when you give to the needy, again, the assumption is this is what the people already do. We're already giving to the needy. Do not announce it with trumpets. When you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets. Continues, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Hypocrite, remember, it means a mask wearer, someone who's wearing a mask, an actor. So truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. If they were keeping score, they got all the points they're going to get, is what he's saying. But when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. It's really simple, right? This assumption is that people are regularly giving to the folks who are in need in their communities. And he's like, look out for the poor among you, but just don't bring the trumpet and like announce it. Hey, everybody, I'm giving to the poor. Don't make a big scene out of it. Don't make a big broadcast about it. There's something that happens to you when you regularly are parting with things that you own to give them to other people. A sacrifice by you for another person does something internally, but don't make it about other people seeing it, is what Jesus says. Then he gives another example. Verse 5. He says, and when you pray, as if this is a regular practice for these people, don't be like the hypocrites, once again, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by other people. Look at me, I'm praying. Isn't this wonderful? Check me out. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. There's their points. And it's not the game we're playing. But when you pray, go into your room and close the door and pray to your Father who's unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Then he says one more thing. He adds one more to this one. He says, look, and when you pray, don't keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they'll be heard because of their many words. Don't be like them. By the way, the very next verses after this are where Jesus outlines what's called the Our Father, or the Lord's Prayer, sometimes called the Our Father, depending on your tradition. But there's the Lord's Prayer that comes next. He's like, look, don't worry about it. Here's how you should pray. Don't panic. Here's an example of what a prayer might look like. He's saying, look, look, when you're everybody, he's assuming everybody's praying, and he's saying, look, that's a regular practice that ought to be happening. Just don't make it such that everybody is like checking you out while you're doing it. Like, it's not the question if you are seen, which is important to keep in mind. It's not like if you're seen, like someone witnessed you, it's all over, you blew it. The question is, are you trying to be seen? It's not if you are seen, it's if you are trying to be seen. Now, one example people ask me about every so often, and I think it's really kind of, it's splitting hairs a little bit. They're like, what about if we're like at a restaurant? Aren't the Christians supposed to pray before they eat or whatever? Well, it's not explicitly written in the Bible. I think it's a good practice. It's not explicitly written. Sometimes I don't do it. I know that might have shocked you guys. I know. But the point is this. The question is, if you're praying before you eat a meal in public, if the answer is, should I do it? The answer is no, if you're trying to get validation in front of other Christians or other people to see you in front of other people. If you're just doing it because you're genuinely thankful, then go for it. But if you're like, I think I should because these other people think I should, then you're actually missing the point. You with me? Skimming down a few verses. Verse 16. When you fast, don't look somber as the hypocrites do, the mask wearers, right? For they disfigure their faces to show others they're fasting. Like, in other words, look how miserable I am. This is terrible. It's so hard. Fasting, by the way, in case you're wondering what that means. Fasting is, at least the way the Bible talks about it, there's other things, but the Bible in the strictest sense is talking about going without food. So these people are hungry is what he's saying. It's like, so when you're fasting, going without food or water for a period of time, don't do it to make it look like that's happening. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. The whole point, everything is you get it. It's kind of over the top here. The question again is not if you're fasting, which is interesting because in the Western world, I rarely do. I don't fast on a regular basis. It is something to consider for sure because Jesus is assuming people are already doing it. And a lot of you are like, wait a second, if I don't eat, I don't know if you've heard of the term, I believe it's pronounced hangry, where it's like, I become a miserable person and I want to go attack people and, like that's kind of thing. And the point is, that's actually kind of the point of fasting actually, is that you would feel miserable. I know that sounds crazy, but in some ways, some people talk about it like it's the process of emptying myself and the feeling of what that is so that God might fill it, which all of us are like, this is a perfect conversation to have right before we go to the Super Bowl. If you're watching this or checking this out before Super Bowl Sunday. But in any event, there is something to be said about these different practices that Jesus is assuming the people are already doing. So let me just ask you again, as we've kind of concluded this whole series has been building up to a bunch of different practices, which is what we're talking about now. And it's slowly but surely getting us to this particular point. And it isn't about keeping score, how often I've done these things or how I don't do it. It's like, that's not what it's about. It's about you going, I want to generate patterns in my own life that sort of enable me to draw closer to God, to enable me to be shaped by what he's doing inside of me. So let me just ask you, how might God be inviting you to sort of a recurring generosity, to humbly be giving to the poor, the needy around you? What does that look like? Is it partnering with us in our outreach ministry in the local and global community as we do a bunch of stuff in the community? Is it about somehow someone you specifically know in your life who needs your kindness? Is it a family member who needs your own particular kindness, your generosity? Jesus is asking, is there a new rhythm to the regular kind of rhythm of prayer that you have that isn't about publicly praying, but it's about you hearing and connecting with God, not with a ton of words, but it's about reaching out to God, seeking God. Maybe it's even simply saying, you might need a few one-word prayers. Here, help, thanks, please. I mean, these are all simple prayers that maybe you just need to sort of incorporate on a more regular basis. Again, start wherever you are. Don't start where you think that the end result is. Just start where you are with this idea. But is there a new kind of concept of prayer, what it looks like to be praying? And maybe as we kind of approach what is traditionally called Lent, the season between the sort of the 6 weeks or so that lead up to Easter, during that particular time, which starts in about 3 weeks, maybe there's a time for you. God's inviting you to go without something. Maybe it's food for a period of time. Maybe it's a particular kind of thing. The point is that whatever that looks like, there's something good that happens when we're uncomfortable with our regular ordering of everything, of everyday lives. When we go without something, especially food that sort of stimulates our appetite like that, what we're actually saying is, my appetites don't control me. That's what we're actually saying. And so maybe that's part of it. But in whatever it is that you do, whatever God's inviting you to with these particular, what we call disciplines or practices, the point is that we aren't supposed to announce it. Don't put it on Instagram. Don't let everybody know. Don't make it a show. Don't put it on the scoreboard at all. Now, Jesus' mission was clearly to bring the most distant people from him to become part of his adopted family as brothers and sisters. That's always the message. And the way that that happens isn't because he grades on a curve and he's looking for the top 70% of people who are better than most to be able to be part of this cool little club. In fact, the Bible actually describes, brace yourselves, the Bible actually describes us as this way. Romans chapter 5 says that we were once enemies of God. That's really strong language. So Jesus might actually be asking, in a particular sense, if you take my meaning, he's actually asking, what do I do with enemies? What he says is, I give my life for them. I want to bring the most distant people, the ones who are the farthest from me, to be close, like family members, like sons and daughters, that they would regard each other as brothers and sisters, and that they would regard me as their father. Now, the most famous sort of practice throughout the history of the church is called communion. It's an admission that it's a mission of a couple of things. It's an admission, at least of a couple of things, that there is no scoreboard unless I make one. But that's not really the point of all of this stuff, isn't to have a scoreboard at all. There's no scoreboard at all. This is what communion says. There's no scoreboard unless I make one, that perfectionism can't perfect me, that no matter whatever I'm doing, it can be perfect enough to be perfected. And that all those other people, those brothers and sisters in that community, they're not the threat to my own sort of grading, how I'm getting graded on the bell curve, because there isn't one. They're not a threat. They're actually essential to me belonging. And then it's a confession. Communion is anyways, that I'm a work in progress kind of person. Because here's what communion says. Jesus gives us a way that the farthest distance between us and God has been somehow bridged. By his own death on the cross, Jesus gives his own life, taking on everything that would have separated us from him, taking on upon himself, putting it to death, and ending that separation. And so in communion, what we're saying is, I needed that. I couldn't have done it on my own. That it's Jesus who makes a way. And so I lean into him. I follow him. I belong to him. Communion is the regular practice, the regular reorientation, that there's no scoreboard. I'm not keeping score, and I'm not going to be perfect. And I'm a work in progress person. And it is Jesus who makes all of my relationship with him possible. So, however it is that you encounter these practices today, not least of which being communion, might you know that it is not the perfect practices that we're after, but it is a transformed life. Patterns that are built into a particular kind of life where God is at work in us, with brothers and sisters, under the love of the Father. Let's pray together. Jesus, for us, we have so many patterns that have have got us confused, and we're so prone to scorekeeping. We're looking at ways that we might be able to sort of identify ourselves as better than other people. And when we find ourselves to be worse than them, certainly we feel terrible about ourselves. And we're in this endless loop of trying to be better than other people. And yet, God, you give us a very clear picture. There is no scoreboard. That you long to be with us, and you've called us to walk with you. So, Jesus, might we do that in more courageous and beautiful and tender ways. Give us the patience to take on some of those things and the willingness to be transformed by your work in us. So it's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.